What evil lurks in the dark? A question we have all asked ourselves many times. Together, we can start uncovering the truth and mystery behind the darker side of the otherworldly. And now your host of See You in the Dark, Michelle Roos.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of See You in the Dark. Tonight, we're going to go a little bit out there. We talk about things that are otherworldly or unexplainable. Everybody has some kind of, encounter, whether it's paranormal or otherwise. And I actually have the privilege tonight to be speaking to someone that I had actually looked over the second book that he has written. His name is Mr. Charles Lear. He's been writing about UFOs for several years and, talking to people, their stories, finding out exactly, what are we hearing? What are we not hearing? And some of the stuff that I looked at kind of piqued my interest because when I have talked to people who are, talking about the UFOs or talking about aliens, they talk about the grays and different things, just like the paranormal, everything is supposed to be just, love and light and everything's friendly, but there's never that little piece of a darker side of that. So, without any hesitation, right now we're just keeping you guys hanging on. I would like to bring our guest in. If everybody could just welcome Mr. Charles Lear.
Oh, hello there.
Hello, thank you for joining me. I haven't gotten through all the pages, but what I did get through, it kind of just was like, wow, I've always heard different stories. My dad being military and being at some military bases has always been really into aliens, UFOs, and some of the things they've seen. And I was always kind of like, yeah, right, whatever, but then I'm a more on the paranormal side and I'm like, well, people think that also for us. And so when I started looking at it, I'm like, there's a lot of the military in this and what they've seen and what the encounters are, the people, the abductions. People always talk about, when I was abducted, it was beautiful, the light was great and all that. But I'm thinking to myself, if somebody's taking you, that can't be the best feeling and what you've gone through and then be able to speak about it. So if you could just kind of tell everybody a little bit about yourself and really what got you started with doing all this, and then we can continue from there.
Well, sure, thanks. Well, I started writing for Martin Willis over at Podcast UFO several years ago. I think it was around 2018. Um, and he had a spot for a guest blogger, and uh, I contacted him and said, "Hey, uh, I'd like to give it a shot." So I started writing for him, and I've been turning in a blog every week, and now I'm his official blogger as opposed to his guest blogger. And I turn it into an audio blog every week, which he puts on his podcast feeds and posts on YouTube. So, a blog a week since 2000. I think it was 2019, actually. That's a lot of blogs and a lot of cases. So basically, I approach it as a historian journalist. That way, I don't worry about getting my beliefs or disbeliefs into the cases. I've looked at a lot of really intriguing cases. What I do is I go to first source, I get as close to the original source as possible. I like to hear it straight from the witness as I can. I love newspaper stories where it's a witness and a reporter who is not too up on the UFO subject. And I find a lot of one really interesting things you find when you're looking at. I've literally looked at hundreds of cases, uh, and what you find is patterns and things that come up consistently, like. A lot of witnesses complain of eye burn, Klieg conjunctivitis. It's like sunburn of the eyes. Sunburn is another thing that a lot of witnesses complain about. So if I see that, I okay, there's some. This is more than likely credible. And other patterns, such as people who claim to have been abducted. Uh, One thing that shows up time and time again is that there will be uh, a light in the room where they are, possibly in a craft, but they can't see the source of the lighting. So that's really common. I see that over and over again. So um, I've never personally experienced anything, never seen a UFO personally. I have had paranormal experiences in the forms of psychic dreams and strange coincidences. So I believe there's something otherworldly. I believe there's something, and I think it's kind of an overarching um, thing that transcends all the categories people put on paranormal events. I think that there's some otherworldly. It's I lean towards the belief that there's something that coexists with us, that possibly is an extension of our own minds or own whatevers. Uh, that also occasionally messes with us, like a trickster element. So anyway, wrote the out of those blogs came I wrote the Flying Saucer Investigators was the first book, and that was really looking at the UFO, investigating the investigators, not investigating them, but researching them, getting to know who they were, the pioneers, the original people, like Jim and Coral Lorenzen at the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, Donald Kehoe of National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, the very original civilian saucer intelligence New York people, and Jim Mosley, Gray Barker, John Keel, all those good old people. And then I wanted to write a follow up to that. Basically, that book goes from 1947, Kenneth Arnold sighting. Happy UFO Day, by the way, yesterday,
Yeah, yeah.
June 24th, 1947, up to the termination of Project Blue Book in 1969. So I wanted to write a follow up to that the UFO investigators. And I realized what a mess the 1980s was and how difficult that was going to be to write about. So I wanted to take a stab at that through the blogs. I realized the good way to approach it was to look at UFO cover up question mark colon live exclamation point, a television show that was pretty much a ridiculous train wreck in 1988 that showcased all the UFO circus that the 1980s had become. So I did a 5-part series on that. I also did a series on abductions, really looking to see how the gray emerged to become the predominant alien when there's all sorts of critters out there still being reported, yet the gray is the one that seems to be uh, the one alien everybody is just settled on. So I wanted to look at the emergence of the gray and where that all came from. So I did a series on abductions, and I figured I could expand these into a book, and that book has become Crashed Saucers, and Malevolent Aliens.
Yeah, and I noticed that, when you do talk to a lot of people, it's always about the grays. When you were, like talking to people or reading, did it always come that, all the aliens look the same? Or did you find out that, when people were having experiences or whatever, even under hypnosis and stuff that I know that they were doing, way back in the day, um, was there a little bit of a difference of how they looked? Or was the characteristics about the same, just different colors? I mean,
No, wildly different. I want to make clear that I'm a researcher, not an investigator. So I generally don't. I don't talk to people. So
Okay.
I look at cases that are already on the books.
Okay.
So that I research, and so I'll sum up the in the introduction of the book. I write, the purpose of this book is to explore the development of the various narratives that together have created the mythos of gray aliens with big black eyes coming here from Zeta Reticuli to abduct humans, mutilate cattle, and experiment in secret underground bases, working to create hybrids to replace us, all with the knowledge of a secret government that has recovered crashed flying saucers and alien bodies. So that's basically the book in the nutshell. Now, you asked about the Greys. Um, I start with the Betty and Barney Hill story, taken from the report by an ICAP investigator, James Webb. Um, and what's really interesting about it is that uh, the first report was before they had ever gone into any regression hypnosis. It's Walter Webb, it was his name. I'm sorry. So his report is called A Dramatic UFO Encounter in the White Mountains, New Hampshire, the Hill Case. Now, before hypnosis, what came out is the sighting of a craft as they were driving in their car in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, and then seeing that craft come down. And Barney uh, described seeing 8 to 11 figures standing at the windows watching him. He said they were stationary, um, and yeah, his description is they were of human form, dressed in shiny black uniforms and black caps with peaks or bills on them. The uniforms were like glossy leather, and he described them having the cold precision of German officers. So this is in 1961. Um, and this is, a real prototype abduction case. So Betty Hill's description of the creatures comes from, she had a series of dreams. This is also pre-hypnosis. She didn't dream them in the order she wrote them down. She wrote them down for Walter Webb, and she put them in an order that in which they told a narrative. Now she describes the creatures. She describes an abduction scenario with four creatures around her, two in the front, two in the back, four creatures around Barney, two in the front, two in the back. Barney was unconscious in the dreams, being taken to a craft, and all the stuff that a lot of people are familiar with, like a needle being stuck into her navel for a pregnancy test, which is amniocentesis, which wasn't common back then at all. And so Betty very unlikely knew about that. She actually is said to have told the creatures that that's not any pregnancy test we do around here. And then pulling at her teeth and wondering why her teeth didn't come out like Barney's, and her explaining that Barney had dentures. Now, she describes the creatures, uh, saying that their chests were larger than a human's, that they had large noses like Jimmy Durante's. She does describe the skin as being gray, the hair as being dark, possibly black, and the lips as having a bluish tint. So, other than the gray skin, these don't sound like the grays as they've come to be pictured. Um, so, after that, there's a whole chapter about the diversity of strangeness. And 1973 was a crazy year for humanoid reports. And there is a report put out by the Center for UFO Studies called 1973 Year of the Humanoids, written by another Webb, David Webb, from files provided by Ted Blocher, who was an original CSI New York member. And they were both co-chairmen for the Mutual UFO Network Associated Humanoid Study Group. So 1973, the Greys are not even a thing. Uh, so the descriptions. Uh, uh, there's one here. And she describes humanoids as being 4 to 5 feet tall, having fish mouths, orange hands, large oval wraparound eyes with big black pupils. That sort of sounds like the Greys, and wearing fluorescent silver and blue suits. You also in 1973 have the Pascagoula abductions, and those are gray elephant skinned robot like creatures with carrot like protrusions where their ears and nose should be. Um, and the craziest creature in the humanoid report described primary witness described a creature as catfish like with gray fish like skin, a wide mouth, one glowing eye, flipper like feet, webbing between the legs, and feather like objects on its back, which opened and closed with it when it moved. So the Greys were not with us in 1973. They seem to have come about. The closest depiction I saw, uh, earliest depiction I saw was in Bud Hopkins' 1981 book, Missing Time, and drawings by Betty Andreasen that has the creatures with the classic pear-shaped head and the oval eyes, but even here the eyes have pupils, which commonly shows up. So they really didn't come about until Whitley Strieber's uh, book Communion, uh, and I think that was 1987 for that book. And then after that, grays began to predominate.
That's pretty interesting. So, Mike, I have a question for you. So, when we're talking like paranormal, otherworldly, when people are seeing certain things, whether it's in dreams or, psychic dreams, whatever that is, because the mind is such a powerful thing and it tries to, put things in perspective that we can understand.
Hmm.
So, when these people were like describing these things and stuff, do you believe that they were actually describing what they were seeing, or was it something that the mind kinda helped them try to figure out, "Okay, we can't even make sense of what you're seeing, so we're gonna just put these shapes and colors and things like that into it?"
I've heard other people speculate on that. That's an interesting thought, and I'm definitely open to that. There other people describe what it's called screen memories, um,
Mhm.
and, other people describe the images to actually being created by the other, and so yeah, I that's a very interesting question. I obviously don't have an answer to it, but uh, the idea, the grays seem to come mostly from regression hypnosis more than anything else,
Okay.
and they also seem to be helped along by the people who were doing it at the time, who seem to be pushing a certain narrative, the narrative of the what ultimately became the story of gray aliens from Zeta Reticuli taking people aboard craft to experiment with them, and essentially really focused on reproduction. And then that even got into alien hybrids, and David Jacobs really got deep into the idea that hybrids were trying to replace us. His was a more paranoid of. I basically look at the three major researchers: Bud Hopkins,
Mhm.
David Jacobs, and uh, John Mack. Um, so it seems like that really came out of a narrative being pushed by people who were doing the research. Um, and as far as regression hypnosis goes, that was responsible for like the satanic panic when people were taking their parents to court accusing them of sexually abusing them in satanic rituals.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that came out of regression hypnosis, and it was horrible. And if you look in the literature today, I actually cite one article in a Royal Society publication uh, recommending against the use of hypnosis as a means to accurately recover memory. And also, if you look at legal websites, you'll find that judges are urged not to accept regression hypnosis um, uh, testimony based on regression hypnosis and as part of in court. So
Yeah, I've heard that too, because they do say, whatever's in that subconscious, it can actually play out into something different. And I've heard about, like the satanic thing and stuff like that.
mm,
And I've talked to a lot of people, definitely who are into all the UFO, aliens, and it seems like the stories are kind of all the same.
yeah,
And again, that's also in the paranormal world, it's always the same. And so we're always hearing love and light, or they're here because they're here to save us. They're here to take care of us. And I try to wrap my head around it, because I can't say yay or nay. But how much of that do you think is getting overplayed and might be missing a piece of it that we might not be prepared for?
I think quite a bit. I think there are, a number of researchers out there that I've got, made an acquaintance, am acquainted with, like personally, actually have
Hmm.
communication with, and am friends with. Uh, that a difference between them and a lot of researchers is they're open to uh, a lot of more possibilities. They're not trying to. It's not a big problem is researchers filtering out what witnesses are saying because what they're saying doesn't fit what they want to hear in terms of a narrative. So if they hear of a creature, for instance, that doesn't look like a gray, that has one eye and purple feet, they're going to say, okay, this person is making it up. That's too weird. And they're just going to not include that person in their data or in their reports. Um, Whereas there are other researchers that some of whom I know who will hear that and go, oh, and they'll perk up. So,
Yeah.
um, and another thing that's happened is that, for instance, UFO researchers will ask questions like, by the way, have you had any other weird experiences? And then somebody will tell a Bigfoot story. And and then there are certain researchers that will perk up and go further, or they'll also a really common thing with UFO witnesses, if they're asked the right questions, is that they'll bring up some weird paranormal thing. I just heard a great interview. I forget the guy's name. He's a writer. He just appeared on Where Did the Road Go? And he was investigating the cryptid case, uh, the night crawlers, the Fresno Night Stalkers, I think they're called. The Fresno,
Yeah, I think so. I
the the,
believe that's what that is.
the weird little walking pants with the head on.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, yeah. So he was investigating that, and he actually was able to talk to the family of the guy who got the footage, and they told him about uh, seeing black-eyed children, ghosts of children in the closet with black eyes. And he got the impression that they had no idea of the black-eyed children trope. So that's a really interesting thing that a lot of researchers are starting to become more and more open to. It's like there's this whole resurgence in the ideas of John Keel and Jacques Vallée, for instance. and mainly John Keel. John Keel was really big on, he was the author of the Mothman Prophecies, for those of you who
Hmm.
don't know. And he was really big on, ask them what they had for breakfast. Ask them a lot of questions, and just don't settle for the UFO story. And then
That's right.
he'll hear ghost stories and poltergeist stories, and poltergeists are also a very common thing among UFO witnesses.
Oh my gosh, this is crazy because it all kind of, coincides together, and I love this. But Charles, we're going to just take a short break. I definitely want to hear some more about this. We'll be right back.
This September 6th through the 13th, join with like-minded souls in the experience of a lifetime on the Royal Caribbean Ovation of the Seas as we travel from Seattle to Alaska. Internationally renowned researchers, investigators, experiencers, authors, holistic healers, contactees, spiritual luminaries will sail on an extraordinary voyage of transformation. This cruise will explore UFOs, alien contact, cover-ups, ancient mysteries, the paranormal, holistic healing, and spirituality. Experience engaging lectures, one-on-one sessions, private, custom-tailored excursions, and a nightly UFO watch. The cruise is booking up fast. Go to contactatSea.com and be sure to mention the UNX network when you book. That's contactatSea.com or phone 336-749-1219. That's 336-749-1219.
Hey, UFO conference enthusiasts. We've got another great event for you in 2024. The Saucers and Aliens Kansas UFO Day in Dimension G is being held in the UFO capital of Kansas, Geneseo, on July 6th. This is a fun festival in the middle of nowhere. There will be a parade, decorated yards, costumes, vendors, speakers, and a showing of the movie The Day the Earth Stood Still. Appropriately, an 8-foot-tall statue of Gort and a statue of Klaatu will be dedicated. This will be the only museum in the U.S. with these custom-made statues. If you'd like to donate to the statue project or attend the event, visit GeneseoMuseum.com. That's GENESEO Museum.com. Be sure to bring your camera when you attend the event. That's GeneseoMuseum.com.
And welcome back, everyone. We have been sitting here talking about aliens, UFOs, which also can coincide with cryptids and paranormal. I'm bringing my guest back, Mr. Charles Lear. Thank you for joining us this evening. It's been real interesting to, be able to see how everything kind of crosses over. Some people talk about Bigfoot, could be dimensional, the same with Loch Ness and different things like that. And as we're putting it all together, like you said, some of the investigators, researchers, how they find different things out, why they're talking to people that have had sightings. During your research, as you're going through the years, was there ever any particular area that actually had more of those stories that were coming out, or was it just a little bit random all over the place?
Oh, Chestnut Ridge, our man, who's the investigator? Stan Gordon. Stan Gordon out in Chestnut Ridge in Pennsylvania. Uh, uh, Bigfoot and UFO stories together constantly. He's been doing this. He was one of the original guys with the Kecksburg incident. So he hears them all the time, and that area in particular is well known for that. Um, and yeah, they're. Uh, but yeah, there's also what are known as paranormal hotspots. One researcher, Paul Eno, and his son were well known for this, and that was their main focus. Also, Ted Phillips, who was well known for trace research, who was a early protege of J. Allen Hynek, who was a scientific consultant for the Air Force's UFO investigation for its entirety. Ted Phillips was looking at an area called Marley Woods, where he saw all sorts of things, mainly strange lights. But everybody knows about Skinwalker Ranch. No matter what you think about Skinwalker Ranch, the whole Uinta Valley is well known for multiple strange happenings. The main researcher who got that all started was Junior Hicks, which is well before the whole Skinwalker Ranch thing.
Well, and they always say, um, because they're like it has to be an open area or it's a desert. And, just like when we talk about the paranormal, everybody feels like because just this particular land or this building, it can only have this said type of paranormal, not realizing, you know, there's no restrictions for any of that. Um, when researching all of this, have you seen more and more retired military and stuff coming out, starting to tell their stories and trying to, let people know the things they've been seeing for years, even when we're going back into the 60s and 70s, coming out with more of that kind of details?
No. A big part of this book is clearing up a lot of the noise.
Yeah.
What I have found is that people in intelligence in the military are just like people outside of the intelligence and community in the military. They have the same interests we do, and a lot of them are interested in all the crazy paranormal stuff we all love. So, um, basically, the first part of the book is looking at the whole abduction thing. The second part of the book is looking at the crashed saucer stories. Uh, for a long time, researchers wouldn't touch them, and that came about because of the Aztec crash story that first came about in Frank Scully's 1950 book, Behind the Flying Saucers, about a 99-foot saucer, all of which's dimensions were divisible by 9 for some reason. It it was supposedly crashed on a mesa in Aztec, New Mexico, and was recovered by the military. Uh, the story came about by a man named Silas P. Newton, who put himself forward as a bigwig in the oil industry, and a mysterious Dr. G, who was the person who was supposedly a scientist who worked on the saucers. That saucer and others that were recovered as well. An investigative reporter, J.P. Kahn, looked into the story, found out that Silas B. Newton, and he got an identity for the mysterious Dr. G, Leo Gebauer. He found out that these two gentlemen were known in the oil industry as operating what's called a doodlebug operation. Running a doodlebug operation, which is where you have a device you claim can find oil and you either sell the device or worthless oil leases. He put out an article exposing them, and what they had done is after Frank Scully's book came out, they claimed their tech was from a flying saucer. So they were getting even investors. They ended up, after his first article came out, people came forward saying they'd been taken, and Khan found one person willing to press charges before the statute of limitations ran out, and he had been taken to the tune of $230,000 in early 1950s money, and they were convicted in Denver. So that's where that story came from, and that put the taint on it for a lot of years until a man named Robert Spencer Carr resurrected it in 1974 during a conference, UFO conference in Florida. And then it made the news. He also said there was an autopsy done by a nurse he knew. This caught the attention of a well-known researcher named Leonard Stringfield, and he put out a paper. He gave a presentation at a MUFON symposium, all about. I think he called his paper "Retrievals of the Third Kind," and in the paper, he describes the Aztec. He describes there being researchers not willing to look at crash retrievals since the Aztec case. So this is all the way since the 1950s. So now here we are in like 1978, and he's basically saying that Aztec story should be looked at again. So it gets resurrected. He's also opened the door to people looking at crash retrieval cases. What's iffy about his presentation is that he has no names. All his sources, all his stories are completely anecdotal. The worst the title of one case he describes says he heard this story from a man's son who heard it from his father, who heard it from his cousin who was in the Air Force. So it's it's really a very shaky paper, but he's opened the door for crash retrieval stories, and this set the stage for Roswell. And it's the whole Roswell story. When you go back to its beginnings and see what it turned into, I don't want to spend a lot of time debating whether it's true or not. But the Roswell story really drew everybody's attention. Okay, so whether you believe it or not, it drew everybody's attention away from a lot of other stories that should have gotten a lot more attention, because this happened in 1947. And for instance, there was a whole the Hudson Valley UFO wave. Are you familiar with that?
No, I'm not.
Well, there you go. This is tens of thousands of witnesses in the 1980s saw these huge triangles the size of football fields, 1, 2, 3 football fields big, that would move like at 20 miles per hour, absolutely silent, would turn on an axis, you know, and literally stopped traffic on the New York Thruway. But nobody, a lot of people don't know about this because everybody was looking at Roswell at the time. Um, and Another thing is that the same year that uh, the Roswell book by Charles Berlitz and William Moore got published, there was this amazing book uh, called the Project Identification, the first scientific field study of UFO phenomena by Harley D. Rutledge, PhD. Rutledge was head of the physics department at a university in Missouri. I'm trying to find it. Southeast Missouri State University at Cape Girardeau. He was chairman of the physics department. And there was this flap in Piedmont, Missouri in 1973. Cars stopping, balls of light, interference with television signals, all sorts of things. When he went to investigate, he resisted at first because he said he didn't, I'm not going to touch this kind of stuff with a 10-foot pole. It'll kill my reputation. But he did go out and investigate. And he noticed that he was seeing lights repeatedly show up in the same areas. And he said, well, this is an opportunity to bring in some equipment if they're going to show up again and be able to get some data. And he did that. He got funded by a local newspaper, and he put out a report at a conference of physics teachers. He did a presentation in 1973 to fulfill his contract with the newspaper, but then continued investigating and finally put out this book the same year as the Roswell incident came out. And people don't know about this book because everybody was looking at Roswell. So that's another, case where, and what a, I'm definitely not the only one who considers this a very iffy story. Um, uh, I'm not going to, I can name names, but I'm not going to because I've just spoken with them.
No, I mean,
But
so for me, Roswell too, I will have to say for my personal thing, I thought, even if something did happen, I think they took it out and made it bigger than what it
well,
was.
let's go to the very beginning, and then we can stop about Roswell. Okay, the very beginning. Now, what's really interesting is on Mac Brazel, the rancher who discovered the debris, um, found it on June 14th. Now, this is 10 days before Arnold's sighting on June 24th. So flying saucers weren't even a thing back then at that point.
Mhm.
Okay. The first description of it, when the earliest is in a July 9th, 1947 record, Roswell Daily Record article titled, headlined, Harassed Rancher Who Located Saucer, Sorry He Told About It. And he's described as being sorry he told about it because of the publicity that attended his find. And people got crazy back in the days before television, and you had,
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
yeah, you've heard the, I don't know if you've heard the stories of like witnesses like having people camp out on their lawn,
Mhm.
you know. So yeah, it could get pretty crazy. But anyway, this description is from Mac Brazel. The balloon, which held it up, if that's how it worked, must have been about 12 feet long. Um, the rubber was smoky gray in color and scattered over an area 200 yards in diameter. When the debris was gathered up, the tinfoil, paper, tape, and sticks made a bundle about 3 feet long and 7 or 8 inches thick, while the rubber made a bundle about 18 or 20 inches long and maybe 8 inches thick. And that's where it starts. And then it turns into this big crashed saucer in two areas. And then all of a sudden you get bodies thrown in and autopsies and on and on and on and on. And meantime, all these other cases are getting lost.
And you
So,
know what though? That's like, but I got to tell you, that happens in the paranormal field too. There are those stories that are like really out there and need to be heard, but because something was made bigger, or if there was a movie or a bigger article, that gets all the traction,
Yeah.
whether it's like across the board like that.
Yeah, and then you throw into the mix, after Charles Berlitz, for instance, okay, the co-author, the main author of the Roswell incident, Moore and Stanton Friedman did the research. So Berlitz is the main author in that, and he's the name. Charles Berlitz is responsible for three major myths that are still with us: the Bermuda Triangle, the
Uh-huh.
Philadelphia experiment, and the Roswell story. Okay. The Bermuda Triangle, one case he cites as being one case supposedly one plane supposed to be a victim of the Bermuda Triangle crashed in Canada, but it was on its way to Bermuda, so it still counted. there,
Yeah.
there is an account of Moore meeting up with a Dr. Reinhardt. Well, this same account, very similar account, shows up in another book published a year earlier that was fictional, and it talks about the protagonist meeting Dr. Reinhardt, who was banished from the scientific community for knowing too much about a strange experiment, very much like the Philadelphia experiment. The novel was by George Simpson and Neil Burger, titled Thin Air. So this in chapter 9 of the Philadelphia experiment. You've got they didn't even change the name. It's Dr. Reinhardt in both versions, and there's also a cat in both versions. Then it's like the same story. So that's the Philadelphia experiment, and then you get to the Roswell incident, and there's been I'm not going to get into the. The main source for that is Jesse Marcel, and his credibility got really attacked by uh, Robert Todd, brought into question by Robert Todd. Basically, finding it, he got a hold of 200 pages of Marcel's military records and found he lied about his military service and his college education. Like real big blatant lies, like having a PhD in physics and going to 5 universities when he only really seemed to have attended a year at Louisiana State University, and that pretty much auditing. So that's the Roswell incident. And then you throw into the mix Richard Doty. So, a self proclaimed CIA trained disinformation agent with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. And I'm looking at all this stuff, trying to just, I went through all this stuff, trying to clear all this circus aspect out of the story I want to tell. So I'm going to go back and do the UFO investigators and talk about the things like project identification, the Hudson Valley Wave, and there's also Pine Bush, New York, extraordinary events in Pine Bush, New York around the 1980s. And, talk about all these without all this other circus aspect getting in the way of my narrative. And I can basically refer the readers to this book if you want to know about all that stuff. But yeah, a lot of craziness came out of it. And when you were talking about the military people, an interesting thing that happened, basically, Richard Doty seems to have been sanctioned and put into action in a real, honest to God, disinformation campaign against one Paul Benowitz, who was a military contractor who had a company called Thunder Scientific. They made precision instruments. He became convinced he was seeing UFOs, and around the Manzano weapons storage area, his house was right next to Kirtland Air Force Base. And he could see the Manzano weapons storage area from his deck, and he set up surveillance equipment. He also set up radio surveillance equipment, became convinced that he was hearing getting signals from aliens. And then he set up a computer program and to decode the messages. And since he wrote it, he became convinced that he was decoding real alien messages. So he gave a presentation. He contacted the Kirtland Air Force Base security saying, I think you have a security problem. Uh, Doty was sent out to check it out. Doty sees he has all this surveillance equipment. He reports back to his bosses. They invite Benowitz out to give a presentation, and he goes full blown. We're being invaded by aliens. I'm talking to them. Can you fund me to do some more research? They initially say they're going to, and then they say we regret we can't. But in essence, you can I include all the there are a bunch of FOSI forms that actually describe all this, which is amazing. These are official documents that were released through FOIA requests, and they literally describe this meeting in front of like colonels and brigadier generals and leading scientists at Monsanto, listening to this guy talking about, you know, picking up alien radio signals. It turns out what he was more than likely picking up were secret transmissions from,
Yep.
watching secret tests and picking up secret transmissions. So that's a real security problem. So it seems they sick Doty on him, and Doty, the targets were Moore, Benowitz, and Linda Moulton Howe also reported with an affidavit that she had encountered Doty as well, that he brought her to his office because she was interested in Benowitz's work. She was into cattle mutilation. Benowitz had initially was friends with Gabe Valdez from Dulce, New Mexico, who was a big cattle mutilation researcher. And so Moulton Howe was interested in Benowitz's work. So it makes sense that Moulton Howe would be a subject for Doty, as well as William Moore, because Benowitz was a APRO member. Moore was the director of research at APRO and also had just come into prominence with the Roswell story. So it makes sense that he would be a target. So Benowitz approached Moore and made a deal with him saying, you keep an eye on UFO organizations and help us spread a little disinformation, and we'll give you some real information. So that's called, a lot of people consider that Moore's deal with the devil. So you throw that into the mix with the Roswell story, and then the MJ12 papers came out, which are very likely created by Doty. Whether they're sanctioned by the Air Force Office of Special Investigations or not is an open question. I lean towards the idea that Doty kind of did that on his own. But you throw that into the mix and things are starting to get really out of control. Add to that, John Lear being interested in Benowitz's work. And Benowitz put out this. Benowitz was really. A lot of people accused Doty of putting Benowitz, driving him nuts by telling him he was right about all this alien stuff, and also convincing him there was an underground alien base at Dulce, New Mexico, and that this drove him to a mental hospital. He seems to have been on his way well before he met Doty, and he put out this screed called Project Beta, which was written all in caps. And like one thing he says is, it appears the humanoids are fed by formula made from human or cattle material or both, and they are made from the same material by gene splicing and use of female encounter victims' ovum, and on and on and on and on and on. And he was convinced that there was a full-out alien invasion underway, and that we could flush them out by damming up a river they depended on, and when they went to take off in their ships, we could stop them with beam weapons that he had invented. So Moore took a lot of this. Lear took a lot of this stuff and made it his own, and put it on a post on Paranet. A lot of people bought into this. Another guy came along, William Cooper. He backed up Lear. These two, because without writing a single book, and because Paranet was a bulletin board service. This was something long before social media, just before the internet. You dialed up, and there were basically 6 computers around the country
Yep.
running this thing. It's a place where people could post, and these guys posted without writing a single book and quickly rose to prominence in the UFO community. So Moore had a little competition, I'm trying to stick to your original thing about the military.
Oh,
What,
no, that's fine. I mean,
well, what was really interesting is that Barry Greenwood and Brad Sparks looked into this whole thing, and they delivered a presentation from a paper they wrote at another MUFON symposium. And yeah, 2009 MUFON symposium. And the paper is called The Secret Pratt Tapes and Origins of MJ-12. Moore was trying to write a book with Robert Pratt, a well-known researcher and author reporter. And it was based on his work with Doty, Moore's work with Doty. Pratt suggested it be fictionalized, so they didn't have to vet all the information, and Moore begrudgingly agreed. They never published it, but Pratt had recorded some of their conversations and played it for Sparks and Greenwood. What Sparks and Greenwood started seeing is that there was a feedback loop, and it seemed to them that Moore and Friedman, during their research, I think Friedman actually said to Sparks, Brad Sparks, that they were passing all their information to Doty. Then all that information, mainly in the forms of names, turns up in the MJ-12 documents. So you've got names like Roscoe Hillenkoetter, who was the first director of the CIA. And he was also an early board member with the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. You have Vannevar Bush, James Forrestal, and one that took Moore and Friedman by surprise was Donald Menzel, who was an arch debunker of his day. So they describe a feedback loop going on between them. Well, another feedback loop developed with Moore and Doty. So we're running out of time now.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Oh
Convoluted
my
story.
God. You were taking me right down that rabbit hole with you too. I was just like intrigued, and I forgot to look at the time myself.
Yeah.
But I would love to have you back on because this is so interesting, and and it kind of coincides with everything we do. Everything otherworldly. I want to thank you for being with us tonight. Your books, where can people find those if they would like a book of yours to kind of read it?
Amazon.com, Flying Investigators, for those of you who want to be enchanted, and Crash Saucers, Malevolent Aliens, for those of you who want to be disenchanted.
Absolutely. Charles, thank you so much again for being on my show. This was so amazing to hear. And everyone, thank you for joining us. And remember, I'll see you in the dark.
Hey, cheers.